Welcome to another in our series of Kehillat Israel podcasts. This is a recording of Rabbi Amy Bernstein's weekly Friday morning Torah study.
We are engaging with the words of Devarim of Deuteronomy. We are in the second parsha of Deuteronomy. We are in Vaetchanan, which comes from Cain, the word grace. And it means that Moshe is talking to the people, telling them that he sought God's grace, in that he sought for God to overturn the decree that he could not go into the promised land. And of course, we know that didn't happen. God says, don't talk to me about this. So that's where we get the name of the parsha, Vaetchanan. So this is also, of course, famously the parsha that has Shema as part of it. And we get it from chapter 6 of Deuteronomy. We are going to continue a little bit because y'all seemed kind of into it. We're going to continue with the framing by the rabbis liturgically through Torah and Haftarah, the period from before Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av was this past week. Remember last Friday we studied that Tisha B'Av has a special Haftarah, Echa, right? So we talked about how and the prophecy about the destruction of Israelite civilization. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about how that arc continues, because actually that arc continues to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. We often stay so focused on what's happening this week or what, like even on Tisha B'Av, that it's my fault. I don't talk a lot about the broader arc. So I wanted to let y'all in on that, like that there's this whole arc from before Tisha B'Av through the high holidays. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So let's see where the rabbis tie all this from, where they start all this from and what they tie it to in our parsha. So now this is Moshe addressing the people. We are in Deuteronomy 4, verse 5. Re'eh, see, limadati etchem chukim u'mishpatim ka'asher tzivani Adonai Elohai. So I taught y'all the laws and the statutes that God commanded me, la'asot kein b'kerev haaretz, that to do in the land that you are about to enter as your inheritance. Observe them faithfully, for that will be proof of your chokhmatem, your chokhmah, your wisdom and discernment, le'enei ha'amim, in the eyes of the nations, who, when they hear all the laws that y'all are, implementing, they're going to say, wow, am chacham, this is a wise people. V'navon, an understanding people. Hagoy hagadol hazeh, this huge nation. Ki mi goy gadol asher lo Elohim kruvim elav. So what great nation is there that has a God so close as Yud He Vav He, our God, whenever we call on God? Or what great nation has statutes and rules as perfect as this Torah that I set before you this day? But take utmost care and watch yourselves scrupulously, so that you do not forget the things you saw with your own eyes, and so that they do not fade from your mind as long as you live. And make them known to your children and your children's children. The day you stood before the eternal, your God, at Chorev, when God said to me, gather the people to me that I may let them hear my words, in order that they may learn to revere me as long as they live on earth, and may so teach their children. You came forward and stood at the foot of the mountain. The mountain was ablaze with flames to the very skies, dark with the densest clouds. God spoke to you out of the fire. You heard the sound of words, but perceived no shape, nothing but a voice, right? The Deuteronomist has God as an disembodied voice. No emotions, anything like that. God's in God's heaven. The covenant that you were commanded to observe, the 10 commandments, was declared to you, and God inscribed them on the 2 tablets of stone. And at the same time, God commanded me to impart to you laws and rules for you to observe in the land that you are to cross into and to occupy. For your own sake, therefore, be most careful, since you saw no shape when God spoke to you at Chorev out of the fire, not to act wickedly and make for yourselves a sculptured image in any likeness, whatever, the form of a man or woman, the form of any animal on earth, the form of any winged bird that flies in the sky, the form of anything that creeps on the ground, the form of any fish that is in the waters below. And when you look up to the sky and behold the sun and the moon and the stars, the whole heavenly host, you must not be lured into bowing down to them or serving them. These the eternal your God allotted to other peoples everywhere under the heaven, whereas you were taken and brought out of Egypt, that iron blast furnace, to be God's very own people, as is now the case. Then we have Moshe recounting the story of Moshe being told that he cannot enter the land and that he is to be punished on the people's account, and that he, as we had at the beginning of the Parsha, that we have him pleading with God to overturn that ruling, and God says, no, that is not going to happen. This is the chart of Haftarot leading up to both Tisha B'Av and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. We looked at last week, right? We looked at Isaiah 1. We looked at, and we referenced when we looked at Echa, the prophet Jeremiah, we looked at these texts that were about what we call tochacha, what we call in Hebrew rebuke. So these were the texts that were talking to Israel about, watch it, y'all are sliding, and all of these texts that suggest that Israel is messing up. And we know what happened to the north, says these texts. We know what happened to the north because they screwed up. And now Judah, you better be careful because that's going to happen too. We know that, of course, it does. Isaiah is broken into two sources. First Isaiah and second Isaiah. Second Isaiah is known as Deutero-Isaiah. Some people want to have a third author that is third Isaiah. And we are going to be looking at Deutero-Isaiah, second Isaiah. The reason we know these are two different authors is because Isaiah here, 1 through what we see as 27, and it's actually probably 1 through 39, is written as a warning. It's a haftarah of rebuke, of tochacha, and is written and read before the day we commemorate the destruction, because it's written before the destruction. It's a warning about the destruction to Judah. Isaiah 40 is written 150 years later, after the destruction, while there is a vision, because Babylonia is beaten by Persia, King Cyrus, who allows the Jews to return to Jerusalem. So Isaiah, Deutero-Isaiah, the second Isaiah, is this group of texts, 40 through 63. We read a chunk of these texts of what are called consolation, nechemta, texts of comfort. We read them now through Rosh Hashanah. One haftarah every Shabbat from Isaiah to talk about comfort, the prophet comforting the people. So let's look at what the one is for this Torah portion, Vaetchanan. Very, very famous haftarah. Nachamu, nachamu ami yomar Elohechem. So nachamu is plural. The scholars argue over whether this is plural meaning the people or meaning who's doing the comforting. So it could be y'all comfort, y'all comfort. Comfort whom? Ami, my people, says your God. So who's the y'all? It can either be who do y'all, what's your guess? Who's the y'all?
The people, the Jews in Babylon.
Comforting whom?
The other Jews in Babylon.
So the Jews of Babylon are supposed to comfort the Jews of Babylon? No, I'm asking. Like what? Okay, let's say that. Let's say yes. So what does that mean? God is talking to whom? Which Jews of Babylon?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Sorry, just to help me frame this a little bit.
Sure.
When you see that the line, so the separation of 150 years, how does this piece contrast to the previous? I know we reviewed some of it last week, but just what is the biggest contrast in terms of tone, in terms of, that's called rebuke. So can you help us frame it? Because then that can maybe help me answer your question.
Sure. So the texts of tochacha, of rebuke, are texts saying, y'all are screwing up. Remember what God did too. Remember, if you go astray, right, terrible things are going to happen. So it's all warnings. about terrible, terrible things that are going to happen. And it's predicting the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. These are texts of comfort.
So maybe it's comfort, oh, comfort. In other words, it's more about contrasting to that. So it's not Jews trying to comfort Jews. I don't know, but from what I'm seeing, it's God that's okay, there were all these warnings, and now there's just this juxtaposition, I think. I don't know.
Okay, so you see, it's not as simple as just reading a translation, right? That's all I'm trying to get at, really, is it's in the plural, command form. Some y'all is being not commanded, but told to comfort God's people. So scholars have to ask, who's the y'all? Who's the ooh of Nachamu? So to Pam's point, it could be people who have faith and trust that they're going to return to the land. Those folks among you need to comfort the folks who are freaking out because they're in exile, because Jerusalem has been destroyed, because they believe there's no future, because they believe the Jewish project is over. That could be who's being addressed. It could be God talking to prophets, right? Talking to the prophets, saying, okay, they've been chastised, they've been destroyed, they've been displaced. Now they need to be offered comfort because it's about to change. And if they don't change their attitude going back to Israel, what's going to happen? Pam's nodding, right? What's going to happen is it's going to happen all over again, which we know it does with the destruction of the second temple, right? So we already know history. But if you look at Isaiah, it's saying, okay, maybe what it's saying is they need an attitude shift if they're going to go back and build something different. And we know the second temple period lasted. It was a very successful period. All right, Susan?
Well, I mean, it speaks to us too, because, we've seen so many destruction of hypothetically all the Jews in places, and we survive.
Yes. So this is the rabbinic move, Susan, exactly, is to say, don't think this is past. Don't think this happened one time in history. The rabbis put this here after Tisha B'Av, because remember, Tisha B'Av becomes the day commemorating every catastrophe that befell the Jewish people, to Susan's point. And so the rabbis say, Nachamu, Nachamu Ami is always, we always need to hear these words of consolation as the Jewish people, because we are always dealing with some kind of threat, with some kind of scary something. And so we always need the nechemta, we always need the comfort of the prophet's word. Nice. Betsy?
I have a question about observance of Tisha B'Av. Is it during their observance time, which I know is it's a mourning period, and right, they act as if they're in mourning like they would be for a relative. Are they mourning all these catastrophes that befell the Jewish people? Do they consider all those things to have happened around the same time of year, or are they just picking a date and saying, let's commemorate all the disasters that befell us?
The rabbis find a way to link every destruction of the Jewish people to this time. So it might not be that it was this day. How do I say it? So in other words, for the Spanish expulsion, they pick Tisha B'Av as the day the decree was actually signed, issued. Exactly. So it meant terrible years of all kinds of suffering, but they point to Tisha B'Av as that is the day the actual declaration was signed by the king and queen that condemned all these Jews to forcible conversion or expulsion or both. Like the second temple, it's when the walls of Jerusalem were breached. Was on Tisha B'Av. On Tisha B'Av, the Jews of the Warsaw Ghetto were transported to Treblinka. So it's not, so they pick, a way that each of these catastrophes that have befallen the Jewish people relate to Tisha B'Av.
I wonder how they incorporate October 7th, because that's a whole different time of year.
Yeah. The day that they bought the things that flew over the, the rabbis are good at this. They're good at this. They'll find a way. So we'll find a way. So it commemorates all of the things that have befallen. Okay. Dabru el lev Yerushalayim. Again, it's in the plural. Speak, y'all, to the heart of Jerusalem and call to her that her time of service is finished, that her time of paying for her sin is done, because she has taken from Yud He Vav He double for all of her sins. Chatzoteha. A voice rings out, clear in the desert a road for God, level in the wilderness a highway for our God. Let every valley be raised, every hill and mount made low. Let the rugged ground become level and the ridges become a plain. The presence of God shall appear and all flesh as one shall behold. Ki pi Adonai diber. I would argue with this translation and say ki here means that God has spoken, right? So kavod Adonai, like the glory, the presence of God, everyone will behold, Kipi Adonai diber, and that the voice of God, the mouth of God has spoken. So people will be sure that this is God, this is the real God. Yud He Vav He. A voice rings out, kra, proclaim. Another asks, what shall I proclaim? All flesh is grass, all its goodness like flowers of the field. Grass withers, flowers fade when God's breath blows on them. Indeed, people are but grass. Grass withers, flowers fade, but the word of our God is always fulfilled. So some people died in captivity. Some people died in exile because we are short-lived. We are like grass. We are like flowers. But the word of our God, Yakum Leolam, is established forever, meaning God's promise of return will be fulfilled, even though it's been 100. Upon a lofty mountain ascend, O herald of Zion. Raise your voice with strength, O herald of Yerushalayim. Raise your voice, fear not. Say to the cities of Judah, Hine Elohechem, here is your God. Hine Adonai Elohim b'chazak yavo. So behold, Adonai, my God, b'chazak yavo, in strength comes, uzra'o moshla, and whose arm, remember the extended arm, has brought the reward. Scharo, the reward is in front of God. Like a shepherd who pastures the flock, gathers up the lambs and carries them in an embrace while gently driving the mother sheep, who measured the waters with a hand's hollow and gauged the skies with a span and meted earth's dust with a measure and weighed the mountains with a scale and the hills with a balance. Who has plumbed the mind of God? Can anyone disclose God's plan? Who did God consult, and who bestowed understanding, providing guidance in the way of right? Who guided God in knowledge and made known the path of wisdom? The nations are but a drop in a bucket, reckoned as dust on a balance. The very coastlands are lifted like motes. Lebanon is not fuel enough, nor its beasts enough for sacrifice. All nations are as naught in God's sight, who accounts them as less than nothing. To whom then can you liken God? With what form can you make a comparison? We are getting who created the earth and the world? Who created the plan for the universe? Who did God consult? The answer is nobody, right? God's self, some of us would say, is unfolding into all of this. Just God. This is all God. There's no idols, there's no Asherah, there's no Baal, there's no Isis, there's only Yud He Vav He, the God of exile, and the God of return. The God of God is here. God, your penance is done, Jerusalem, and you now can return. And if you doubt that that's possible, remember who created the universe with no help. What is anything? The nations of the world that have exiled you and kept you from Israel. What are they next to the source of life, the ground of all being, the mystery at the heart of reality? Nothing. Don't forget that, Israelite. Okay. I believe that one of the miracles of the Jewish people is that we chose to live into these words with Herzl, that the whole Zionist project, even though it was not a religious project, except for the religious Zionists, of course, but for the Zionists, they 100% lived these words, that they created the possibility of the nation of Israel existing by trusting, believing that it could happen, not because of God, but because of political machination. And because of that, there was a government in place ready when Israel was declared a state. Let's be very clear. The government of Israel was in place before the founding of the state. The entire system of governing Israel did not get invented the day after Israel was declared a state. It was already all laid out. Who did that? People who believed in our time that this was possible, that a return to the land was possible, and that sovereignty for the Jewish people in the Jewish homeland was possible. And every now and then I get an insight into how chutzpahdik that is, how chutzpahdik that was, that people built the state of Israel before there was any evidence that it was going to happen, or that it was how shortly after we had been massacred in Europe, massacred, and people were building the state of Israel before that, during that, and after. I forget sometimes the audacity of our people until I read this and go, oh, right, our folks did the same thing. We didn't call it exile, but right, it was the diaspora. We had no control over the land of Israel, and yet they built, yet they trusted that the source that helped us survive so many other things, that if we get our act together and work hard enough, then, and believe hard enough, then im tirtzu ein zo agada. If the Jewish people really, really, really want it, ein zo agada, then it's not a dream. We can make it. Betsy.
You stole my line. I was just going to say that Theodore Herzl said, if you will it, it is not a dream.
Im tirtzu ein zo agada. And I don't usually wax poetic about this stuff, but I had to this Shabbat. I was like, wow. When I was preparing this for y'all, I was like, you know what? That chutzpah, like someone just put in the chat, that chutzpah is what has enabled the Jewish people to survive everything we have survived for thousands and thousands of years. And we've been persecuted for thousands of years. So it's not like we had this lovely little history that everyone left us alone and that's how we flourished, right? We've been the target for thousands of years and we're still here. And it's because of this chutzpah, this holy chutzpah. Yes, Lori.
It's just funny because I don't get that. I don't get the connection with the Torah portion, because to me it's so much about God, and that God is what's making these. You know, while we were reading it, I was thinking it really relies on a long view of history. Like if we think about what we're going through now, to many of us this feels disastrous. And it's very hard to hold on to a long view of history, that this is a moment in time, and that if I believed in God, I would date, but I'm reassured it'll all be okay in the end. And I don't see how that translates to, if you don't believe there's a God that makes things happen, how you can take comfort from the words of Isaiah that, well, God's there. He created the world. Of course you can rely on the fact that he'll make everyththing okay ultimately. Yeah. So like the way you connect that to the Zionists, I don't see the connection. I don't, you know.
So the way Mehmet, do you want to answer? Do you want to answer, Lori?
Yeah, perhaps, yeah. Even if we don't believe in God, I think we can believe in the power of people's will to make this happen. And whether it's heavenly or just earthly, it doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. Our believing in it is purely enough. That's what I think.
Mm-hmm. Our believing in it enough to work for it, right? I mean, we have to work. We have to do our piece. The prophet doesn't say God's here, it's all going to be okay. The prophet says God is here and gave you commandments about how to live. And if y'all do that, if you build a just and equitable society, it's going to be okay. Bert?
There's the question that people never ask is, do you believe in gravity? Uh-huh. You know, gravity is not provable, it's just observable. And I think part of, because if you've dropped something 1,000 times, it'll drop the 1,001st time. And part of the thing, I think this runs through Jewish tradition, is, and in the literature, is of saying, you know, it's happened before. You've survived before, and believe you're going to survive again. How we end with, I guess, is Zechariah, Adonai Echad U'Shmo Echad. It will happen one day. And then it says after the Shema, if you do this and if you do that. So there's a belief that there's some degree of order there, and that we don't have to prove it. It says so many times in the Torah, you've seen this before, you've seen this before. you've seen what God does, so believe it.
Beautiful.
And so the next time someone asks, do you believe in God? You can say, do you believe in gravity?
Well, but I will add, Bert, one has to choose to use God when one says, like when you say, I don't believe in gravity, I experience gravity. Well, some people wouldn't say I experience God. They won't go that far. I do, but
I think a lot of people will say, I feel something, quote, spiritual, but I don't believe in God.
Well, some people don't, right? Yeah. Right. Okay. Rachel?
Yeah. So when you and both what Rabbi, what you said and what Mehmet said made me think of, this is going to sound so silly and trite, but I was making the comparison in my mind when we read this to Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich versus The Secret. And don't laugh, because The Secret is the thing that I always think is such garbage, because it's kind of like manifested, like if you just manifest, things will happen, which is, in my opinion, is garbage, because you can't just like say, $1 million and it'll happen. Like and I know I'm not trying to make this about money, but there's an idea here but Napoleon Hill, wrote this book, Think and Grow Rich, that a lot of people in business are advised to read. And what's interesting about it is it actually takes so much from this. Like it's very religiously grounded. It's very it's very biblically based. And it comes, like, you can see how it's so much in, grounded in this. There's this idea when you said that about, the government was in place, the infrastructure was in place. Yes. I mean, it's that when you put this idea out there, it's like you write it down and then you say, that has this way of putting people into action, of somehow putting us into, causing us to actualize things, whether we're aware of it or not. But that does mean we're doing the work. And maybe that is part of us Godding, right? That is part of what we're doing. And yes, it's doing the work. And, by contrast, so I know this is a little bit of a tangent. By contrast, is there something similar in place for a government in Iran that is not the current government? What has the exile community been doing? And my fear, my concern, one of my concerns is that there isn't something like that in place, right? So part of where, the movement there is not, is failing to really gain the traction it needs, is that it doesn't have that same, it doesn't have some, a group ready to just step in.
Right. So a couple of things. Right. So number one, Lori, to Rachel's point, I don't relate to these texts saying God's going to make it okay and therefore it's going to be okay. I believe if we God, it's right. That's what creates certain possibilities. Like when we verb God, however you want to say that, when we're about Godding, then that's what makes it possible, right? Building on the tradition and on what we understand to be those things that we know leads to justice and righteousness and goodness and fairness and compassion and equity, like all those things, we create the possibilities that the prophet is talking about. That's how I relate to these texts. Rachel, to your point, it took people being able to access the idea of a nation state being the answer to the Jewish problem, the Jewish question, in order for that government to be formed before the state of Israel was declared. In other words, you had to have Herzl. You couldn't, it didn't come out of Palestine, right? It came out of somewhere else, thinking that period of nation state building, right? That was the political mechanism for liberation and empowerment and all of that. They had to be educated about that somewhere else, not in oppression. And I think that's what I think is going on with Iran, is it's going to take people who are not worried about getting shot to develop something, right, that could be an alternative. And I don't know how and where and, that's going to happen, but it can't happen for the disempowered who are living under the regime. I mean, it can start there. Certain things can happen there, but right? It took folks being educated somewhere else about thinking differently and other systems for that to be made into a reality in the governance structure of Israel. All right, Alex and then Tamara.
Well, to go back to what Rachel was saying in terms of the manifesting, I just think it's that power of belief. I mean, like the Ted Lasso believe, because what else do we have to sustain us? We have the action piece, but in order for the action piece to happen, there has to be a belief, whether it's in something higher, whether it's in the collective. But I think in order for humanity to soldier on, and it's just keep returning back to this belief. So whether that's in the metaphysical, in God, in the people, but in something. And then I don't know. I mean, this is, I feel like a little bit off topic, but with the Iran situation and from my understanding, when it comes to a movement, and it's really interesting that you bring up Herzl and that having to be in the diaspora in order to create this nation state, but like going to the whole Freirean, critical theory piece, which is like it has to be from and of the people. Doesn't mean it can't be an assistance, but that's like ultimately the change can't be brought. But this is different. Creating a nation state versus creating a regime change and some sort of more liberating government. But
yeah, and I'm sorry if I misspoke if I implied that it didn't have to happen there too among the people. I'm sorry.
I don't know how it has to happen.
Well, and we'll see. We'll see. We'll see. And I think the believing in that I heard earlier is believing in the big arc of time. The large arc of history. What's that saying about, the arc, is long, but it bends towards justice?
I hope.
Some of us have to believe that over the long haul of human history, there is an evolution in thought and in consciousness and in whatever that's going to lead to us figuring this stuff out. Because if we don't hold room for that, we're sunk, right? Like, what's the point? Whether it's climate change, or equity among peoples and the divide between rich and poor and the East and West. Like, if we don't believe there's a possibility of figuring this stuff out as humanity, then what's the point?
But then people, the belief seems to be somewhat diminished currently, because that's when people become tribal again, when they actually stop believing in that bigger arc and resort to, but as Jews, like that's that inflection point of, do we stay, as Jews stay tribal or believe in this bigger pluralist, this notion of pluralism?
I'm not willing to pit those against each other. I believe in both.
Both and, but I'm just saying,
people who have an understanding of universal human values, and a goal for humanity within, and we have our tribe.
I'm just saying, like, it looks like people have gone in this direction, not even just Jews, like of this more tribal direction, when a society starts to become, shall we say, unwell.
So I'm just not willing to put unwell and tribal together, I guess. Yeah. Okay. So hang on. Polarized, yes. Like, everybody in their camp not hearing each other, that I totally get. All right. Tamara, then Lori.
I don't know that this is anything that you want to comment on, but inside of me, I just feel always a little bit confused about this. When you talk about, by the way, the arc, I'm 100%. Like, I think that that's the answer and a great place to kind of sum things up. When you were talking about having the Israelites having the chutzpah and the government was in place and all this, I guess I wonder about the other non-Jews in Israel, the Palestinians at the time.
What about them?
Well, they didn't have a government in place, I don't think, or I don't know. Like, I always try to get to, some of the crux. It's very complicated.
Okay. I don't want to go too far into it, but
that's what I was saying.
What I will say is the Zionists accepted the deal. They accepted. Wait, hang on, Susan. They accepted partition. The Zionists accepted the offer of the world community that there would be Palestine and Israel. The Palestinians did not. They could have had a government. They could have had a country. They could have had Palestine. They could have had it. But instead, 5 Arab countries declared war on the new state of Israel. And that's when Israel took territory, and the whole thing got screwed up. The whole plan got screwed up. But it was because, let's be clear, the Arab world sought to destroy the new Jewish state. 5 enemy armies attacked, assuming that they would destroy the new state. And here we are. So there could have been Palestine and Israel. Absolutely, that was the plan. Zionists accepted that.
I hear you.
Just one very small fact.
Maybe another time we can have that discussion.
But Tamara, on June 12th, 1949, Israel proposed to the Arab villages that they could return to their home, the Arab Legion. So from the very beginning, Israel said, we're going to be a Jewish state and we'll have Arabs here.
All right, so we're gonna leave this conversation. Yeah. We're gonna leave this conversation because it's going to take us way far afield. Yeah. I'm not saying we shouldn't have it, but Tamara, to your point, I appreciate that when we celebrate the Zionist effort and then the fruition, that it comes to, I get it, that there's sadness that wasn't happening on the Palestinian side. I totally agree. And I believe the Palestinians were screwed by their own people. They were screwed by the Arab nations who wanted them to stay in camps and wanted them to stay refugees for a political point and a political purpose. And the Palestinians were screwed out of a state by those Arab nations and continue to be abandoned by those Arab nations, in my humble opinion, who could have been all this time pouring money into the West Bank and into Gaza to make it something that Palestinians want to live for and not feel like they have to die for. So obviously I have a lot of strong.
Right. They may
but I agree. It's a tragedy. It is an absolute travesty that the Palestinians have been in the position that they've been. Okay. All right. Quickly, Lori and Alex, and then I want to move on.
This is quick. Again, while you were talking, what occurred to me is the Exodus story, and on the assumption that all of this is written retroactively, telling stories for a purpose, that the Jews were slaves for 400 years, or the Hebrews, and it's celebrated as the Exodus, and that, again, it's that we have to take the long view of history. So it's 150 years in Babylonia, but you come back. And so I think that if you want to look to Torah as how to understand life and the world, it is, look, there is a long view. And like whatever you're stuck in at the moment doesn't last forever.
Thank you.
And I find that reassuring.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I'm bringing in these texts outside of Tanakh, outside of the 5 books that we usually do, because I think it does expose us to the fact that Jews have had to have a long view, right, forever, starting all the way back with the destruction of the first temple. Like Jews have had to have a long view. Like Bubby said, it's what gives her hope. It's like, that's what, because without it, there's no reason really to hope, without that longer view. All right. Susan, quick.
We Jews forget to look at the history of Israel because there were 5 times that during the negotiations with Yasser Arafat that Israel said we'll approve a Palestinian state, and 5 times the Palestinians rejected.
Yeah. Okay. This is Rabbi Tamar Elad-Appelbaum, one of my teachers at Hartman. One of my favorite teachers, is incredible. She's Sephardi, Orthodox, Sephardic, amazing teacher of Torah. All right. So, and look what she says. Let's go back a little. Remember last week we talked about Ayeka and Echa. So this is her Torah commentary on Vaetchanan. I love it when all of our strands come together, right? So this is her commentary on this week's Parsha. She says Ayeka, Echa, both written in Hebrew in the very same way. One word that forces us to examine our responsibility to each other and the world. Where are we? How do we treat the people around us? And what are we building? When I observe life in Jerusalem, our holy city, that I have the privilege of calling home, I watch relationships of care take shape and unfold. And by the way, she's very involved in dialogue between Israeli and Palestinian women. Very involved. I watch relationships of care take shape and unfold. And I know we must ask how we cultivate a deep love for our people wherever we are and all of humanity. Our beloved holy city was destroyed because of sinat hinam, hatred among us. And now we must heal our people through ahavat Israel for all, the love of Israel for all. We need this transformation urgently amongst ourselves at the level of neighbors, our global one Jewish family, and humanity at large. Since October 7th, we've been living through a period of intense transition. The whole world is full of hatred, extremism, and frailty. On Tisha B'Av, we stand directly on the threshold between Sinat Chinam, baseless hatred, and Ahavat Chinam, baseless love. The call, Ayeka, Echa, is a reminder to choose the latter and for us to teach others to make the same choice, meaning we can read Ayeka or Echa. It's up to us. Of course, many of our fellow Jews are asking personal versions of Ayeka, Echa right now. When faced with rising anti-Semitism, our people are raising serious concerns about what safety looks like and what kind of future their children will have. Our people's longing is real, and we owe our fellow Jews the certainty that each of us belongs, is loved, and is part of our one story wherever we live. These are heavy questions, and they often cause me to pause and reconnect with the greatest truth about the Jewish people. I love this. We are a people that knows trauma all too well, yet remarkably, we are forever and eternally rebels of hope. In the face of tragedy and despair, we rebel by courageously creating goodness and models of kindness. Hope is a behavior that starts with how we treat each other. Just as the stars shine in the sky, the Jewish people must face the darkness and keep shining the light of hope and faith here on the ground. The Torah itself begins by recounting the first battle between darkness and light. Breshit, the story of creation, begins with darkness, what devours us and our hope. But within that darkness, we understand how fragile we all are and how much we all need humility, courage, and faith. It is out of humbleness that we can then learn to follow God and say, Yehi Or, let there be light. Not for us as individuals, but for all our people and world in the holiest way possible. Hasidic masters teach that Tisha B'Av is the starting line of the road to Yom Kippur. More than what happens on this day of mourning for what happened, we must decide who we will become in the coming year by the time we reach the Day of Atonement. The path forward is far from simple, but from my perspective, we are all privileged to be leaders in this time and are called to reestablish together our covenant of hope and faith. I love, and she's the gentlest, tiniest woman, soft-spoken, beautiful human being, so gentle and humble, and she's calling us rebels of hope. I love that because that is what it's going to take. It's going to take rebels of hope, courageously saying we can choose to answer the call, Ayeka, where are you? And the prophet is saying, by building a just society, that's how. And that part for us is eternal teaching. It doesn't change. Only happy people can create a happy world. Mm-hmm. Only healthy people can create a healthy world, right? So we have to create healthy societies in order for us to truly believe there's hope for humanity to build a healthy world. And that we can hold on to. That, I believe, this week, what does that mean this week? What does that mean for me as we get ready to vote in November, right? What does that mean for the PRC having a gathering on Sunday for us to talk to candidates? Are we going to show up? Are we going to engage? Right? That is what Tamar says, Rabbi Appelbaum says, is what Torah, the prophets, Moshe, it's what all of this is about. It's about saying we choose to be rebels of hope, leaning into these teachings about how we can make society one that, if it's replicated throughout the world, makes this world, as Bert said earlier, one where on that day, God's name will be one and every people will be one, that we will all get it, that there's something bigger than us, and we will all get it, that we share that, and we will all get it, that we are equally responsible for how we translate that into human life and life for every creature on this planet.
Amen.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
You've been listening to Rabbi Amy Bernstein's Friday morning Torah study from Kehillat Israel in Pacific Palisades, California. For more information, go to our website, www.ourki.org.